Quick recap. In the last episode, we started discussing the suggestions that Federation of Automotive Dealers Association, FADA, has made on the Model Dealership Agreement, or MDA as they call it. And we had discussed first two suggestions. First, standardized terms or the standardized term for the agreement, and second, termination clauses and contours around termination clauses. In this episode, we will try and finish the remaining suggestions and my views around the same. Hello, friends. I am Amol Apte, and you are with me on the Lex Prudence podcast, Automotive Industry Series. If you haven't had a chance of listening to the previous episodes of this podcast, then do give it a try, and I'm sure you will have a better context of the discussions that we are doing in this series. Now, let's just straight away get into the clauses. As I said, the first two clauses that we discussed in last episode were standardization of the term of the agreement and renewal terms and LOI related clauses. And the second one was termination clauses and the actions to be taken post serving of termination clauses along with the repurchase obligations were the first two suggestions that FADA had made. And we have discussed them in detail in last episode. The third suggestion that FADA has made is around enabling choice and independence in business decisions. Now, FADA has suggested that the non-compete clauses in the current Indian dealership agreements may be done away with, and dealers may be allowed to sell products of competing OEMs insofar as it does not affect the working capital of the dealer. So, what they're essentially saying is, I as a dealer will take care of the working capital requirements that you may have. However, I should have the freedom to choose to be dealer for more than one OEM in the market. It is also seeking to remove rather radical clauses in some of these dealership agreements, which actually needs the dealer to seek permission of the OEM to start any other business, even if it is not the dealership of OEM. So there are two suggestions embedded in this suggestion. One, independence of choosing what I want to do as a dealer, and how many people or how many companies, how many OEMs do I want to engage as a dealer, freedom to choose on that part. And the second is, don't have radical clauses like me coming to you every single time when I want to start a new business. Now, in my view, the non-compete clauses are kept in the agreements with the point of view that the dealers give undivided attention to the business of the OEM, which they are committing to. Now, also, OEMs spend quite a lot of money on training the sales and service staff, uh, developing the market, appoint certain sales staff there for the territory, etc., etc., and therefore they want to protect their investments, and that's the reason why they want the knowledge to not pass on to the other uh, OEMs, and the benefits should remain with them itself. And that's the intent when they have these non-compete clauses. But we know that as per Indian Contracts Act, the non-compete may not survive in all scenarios. There are certain exceptions. I've done a podcast way back to you on this subject, and you can go and listen to it on uh, either Spotify or Google Podcast. Now, having said this, if the working capital requirements are taken care of by the dealers, and there is a clear, say, Chinese wall created by the dealers among the sales teams that they use for two different OEMs, then in my view, there may not be a need for having a strict non-compete clauses in the dealership agreement, and therefore, to that extent, I agree with the suggestion that the FADA has made. Also, till such time working capital requirements are taken care of and uh, Chinese walls are created for the sales teams, etc., and attention and time dedication by the dealer is ensured. I don't think you need to have radical clauses where for every single business to be started by the dealer, they need to come to the OEM. So this suggestion, in my view, is quite reasonable, and the OEMs need to start looking at the suggestion to inculcate a reasonable approach towards the agreements. The fourth suggestion that FADA has made is towards consultative process in day-to-day operations. Now, what is this consultative process in day-to-day operations? FADA seems to suggest that the dealer shall be allowed higher level of involvement in day-to-day operations and issues like finalizing the sales targets and issues similar to that. Now, FADA also seems to suggest that the dealer should be allowed to participate in the process of appointment of more than one dealer for the same territory. So again, there are two parts to it. One, when you fix as an OEM, when you fix the sales targets or the sales forecast for a particular territory, where a sorry, where a dealer has been appointed, FADA suggests that the dealer should be made part of those discussions to create an appropriate sales forecast. That's first. The second sub part of this is when you as an OEM decide to appoint another dealer for the same territory, make these dealers or the existing dealer a part of the decision making process. Now, in my opinion, on the face of it, this seems to be a reasonable ask insofar as the sales forecast is concerned. Since the dealers, at least the larger ones, are solely responsible for achievement of sales targets on the ground within their given territory, and therefore they should be made part of the forecasting process. Having said that, in a lot of cases, smaller dealers do not necessarily have the adequate sales force, and it's the OEMs and their sales staff who do a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to achieving the sales targets. And therefore, again, as I said before, a reasonability approach needs to be adopted, and you can't have one size fits all kind of an approach where you uh, necessarily make dealers part of sales forecasting always. Secondly, we've seen earlier that FADA has suggested that dealers may be allowed to accept multiple dealerships or uh, multiple contractual relationships with the competing brands. And on the other hand, FADA is suggesting that OEMs should involve dealers when it comes to appointing multiple dealers in the same territory. So these two thought processes, to my mind, are contradictory, and there needs to be some sort of a balance that FADA also needs to bring in when they suggest the clauses. To my mind, this ask is a little one sided one and may not be practical for all the cases. The fifth suggestion that FADA has made is towards the indemnification. Now, what they are essentially suggesting is to adopt a balanced indemnity clauses in the agreements. And to my mind, this is a fair ask. And every agreement, not only these dealership agreements, but every commercial agreement should ideally have a balanced indemnity clause which covers both the parties from eventual losses that they may have to suffer or that are caused to them on account of the breaches of representation warranties and covenants by the other party. So, this is a no-brainer. I mean, you have to have a balanced approach when you are writing a commercial contract. Both the parties need to have adequate protections via the indemnities. The sixth suggestion, and probably the last one that FADA has made, is around the constitution of an adjudicatory authority for resolving the disputes between dealers and the OEMs. Now, this suggestion is not actually a suggestion uh, to be brought into the contracts, but the foundation of the suggestion is somewhere in the contracts. What they're essentially trying to suggest is to have a motor industry ombudsman kind of a body, which is a semi uh, adjudicatory authority, which is responsible for resolving the disputes and grievances between the OEMs and the dealers. It's a suggestion made to the government. What is the argument supporting that, or what is the argument which supports the need to have such an ombudsman? Is that in FADA's view, the dealership agreements have an arbitration clause inbuilt in it, and because of imbalance of power, the same does not work for dealers. To my mind, this is not a very strong argument. A well drafted and a balanced arbitration clause in any commercial agreement can save a lot of time, money, and effort that goes into the resolution of any commercial dispute. And as such, one need not replace the arbitration clause in the agreement with a quasi judicial or quasi adjudicatory body or authority like ombudsman. If you have a properly drafted arbitration clause which takes care of appointment, process, timelines, awards, everything put together, then that clause, in my opinion, is sufficient to save time, money, and effort on part of the parties. The quasi judicial, quasi adjudicatory bodies have their own challenges, and uh, it's a long drawn process. So, to my mind, only because in someone's opinion, the arbitration clauses are not providing adequate reliefs to the dealers, uh, it may not be a good case to have a uh, not non-judicial, quasi-judicial or quasi adjudicatory body or authority to be placed, and it's a statutory place, and therefore to create a body which only deals with disputes between dealers and automotive industry is a little far-fetched ask. So with this, we end the chapter on the FADA Model Dealership Agreement and my views around the same. I hope all of you liked these discussions. Do drop in your suggestions and comments to make these podcasts interactive and better. I'll meet you next week with a new episode of Lex Prudence Podcast Automotive Industry Series. Till then, namaskar.